Thank you so much, Honorable Minister, for making the trip all the way from Andhra Pradesh to be with us today. It's a real honor and privilege for CPR to have you in our midst, and I know that we have a lot to learn from you. So I'm going to dive straight into our conversation. In fact, it comes in such an opportune way from the discussion we had. You caught, I think, the last few minutes of it, which was really a discussion with largely bureaucrats about state capacity. Very often discussions on state capacity with bureaucrats always fall into saying we need political will, we need political leadership, and then we need the district collector, which is sort of the framing of how bureaucrats think about governance, administration, particularly at the grassroots. I was keen to just start with you with a provocation because your career is so fascinating. I think you're one of the probably rarest of the rare, somebody who started his political career at the grassroots with panchayats. You were sarpanch back in the day, and then came to the to state politics and are now finance minister. So the transfer, the path from sarpanch to finance minister and the approach, therefore, to the questions of local governments from your perspective are genuinely unique, and that's really what we wanted to explore in this conversation with you. But let me start by asking you a provocation that Mr. T.R. Raghunandan left us with in the previous session. When we think about local governance in India, who ought to be supreme, the elected representative or the CEO, Zilla Parishad, or the district collector, the administrator? And how does the administrator and the elected representative interplay with each other? What should that relationship be?
It definitely has to be the elected representative. That's what democracy is about. The CEO, Zilla Parishad, and the district collector I think is a legacy from the British administration, and CEO Zilla Parishad, of course, is I think a little modification that we have made into our local body's governance. One, it has to be the elected representative because the people have elected this person with confidence and trust. And that's what democracy is about, like I told you before. Now, between the CEO, Zilla Parishad, and the district collector, actually the district collector has a different role to perform. The CEO, Zilla Parishad, also has a different role to perform. So, district collector actually started off with the revenue system, land records, etc. That's how it came down from the British administration. And then the CEO Zilla Parishad is supposed to look into the local body governance, local body aspects, and functioning of the local bodies. Over a period of time, it appears that the state governments and central governments, through various programs that they have been implementing through CASDS, centrally assisted state development schemes, and central sector schemes, the collectors have been given much more responsibilities than what they normally ought to have. Now, if you look at some states, I don't know about most of the states, but at least the big states, collectors are heading committees, chairman of committees for about 120 committees. So that is, on a daily basis, most of the time is spent just in looking into the committees and functions. So it is not possible for them to give their complete effort into it. And in the process, the local body governance aspects also have been sort of taken over by the collectors or have been assigned to the collectors. I think your specific question is between the collector and the CEO. The CEO, Zilla Parishad, or any other such different states might have officers who are in between the elected representative and the state government. It has to be independent of the collector to a largest of extent. I think that's how it functions more efficiently.
So one of the big reasons why, at least in my understanding, the collector, the CEO, Zilla Parishad, the administrator, still remains a central part of, or the dominant player in local governance, is because of the fiscal architecture. The old imagination of funds, functions, functionaries has sort of reduced itself to schemes, and more schemes, many of which come from Government of India, but a large proportion also that come from state governments. I just, in your role as finance minister, how do you think of this challenge? Because administration works through schemes and finances also flow through schemes. So two related questions. One, how much of a bottleneck is the schematic nature of fiscal flows for empowering local governments? And if that is a bottleneck, what do you see, given the nature of our fiscal architecture, as tools that could possibly open this up for empowering local governments?
The program, now there are two types. One is the central programs and one is the state programs. So either way it becomes a program with respect to the public. How much are the local bodies empowered and what is the fiscal strength that they have? Barely negligible. You can say nothing at all. So whatever comes as a flow, they get it. Otherwise, they don't have much on their own. In the urban local bodies, to some extent, definitely. But then again, when you look at the revenues to the urban local bodies vis-a-vis the responsibilities that they have or the utilities that they have to provide, again it becomes negligible. Now, unless the local bodies are empowered and they have the money with them, they cannot provide the utilities and services that they conceive. A program or a scheme that is implemented by the center or the state is something that comes as a flow, designed by the state or the center, the money comes. So the local body becomes only an intermediary. At best, maybe in some states where local bodies are a little more empowered like Kerala, probably the selection of beneficiaries, they have a bigger say. But now when it comes to a saturation level, so there's not much contribution of the local body towards selection of beneficiaries either. But there are other utilities which the local bodies have to provide, which the decision is taken by the body. So these days, because of the various program schemes that are being implemented by the center and the state, we look mostly towards them. So that is again driven through the district collector. Whereas the utilities, the local bodies, the basic functions of the local bodies, water, drinking water, sanitation, and then improvement in some employment opportunities, and collection of revenues, fishing, etc., etc. All these are completely in the domain of the local body. So this domain, if the local body has to actually implement it, you have to have money with you. Without money, there's no way that they can implement. So local bodies have to be given sufficient ways of either raising finances, which is possible, or the state or the center has to directly give money to the local body depending on some criteria so that they can do their responsibility in whichever way that they decide, because these are all village specific or town specific. The programs can run independently because there the local body only becomes an intermediary. They don't have a bigger role to play.
Minister, as a student of decentralization and particularly of local governments in India, everything that you have said is music to my ears. We've studied this, we've been arguing for this, we've been debating this now for the better part of, actually since the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment. Hesitated from, despite the constitutional amendments, from making local governments the centerpiece of our fiscal federal architecture. What is stopping us? And also, what's the role of state governments? Because we did an overview not very long ago of state finance commissions across the country, and we found with very, very few, I don't even need fingertips to count it, it's two states that actually have functional state finance commissions. For the most part, these don't exist. And for me, the real puzzle is this. We've had so many live debates in our newspapers, in the public domain. CPR has engaged with these questions too about the central finance commissions. If there was ever a moment where a central finance commission was not formed at the appropriate time as required by the Constitution, or as we saw actually in the early days of the 15th Finance Commission, there's a terms of reference that raises questions. States mobilize and galvanize, and it's not a political issue, it's a critical issue of federalism. Yet local governments don't seem to mobilize and galvanize when state after state after state refuses to set up state finance commissions or implement the recommendations of the state finance commission. So what is the bottleneck?
I think over a period of time, like most of India says, the authority and the power, everything rests only with three people: the PM, the CM, and the DM.
We were just talking about that in the previous session.
So over a period of time, the entire authority started resting with the parliament, the legislature. And the way that these can actually continue to be that way is controlled through the DM. The minute local bodies are empowered, you have a lot of people entering into the arena. So previously, for example, in Andhra Pradesh, we had something called a Samiti system. So approximately one Samiti was a local body that is equivalent to an assembly segment. So Samitis together became the Zilla Parishad. A Samiti president was maybe more powerful than an MLA. The reason is he had the schools with him, he had the local bodies with him, all the Gram Panchayats. So most of the public contact was with the Samiti president. Subsequently, it was reduced to what is called a mandal, a smaller unit. Each Samiti became 3 or 4 or 5 mandals depending on the size. And then automatically as you become smaller, then you become smaller units in exercising your authority and power too. So here comes the question of now, once the legislature and the parliament has complete control over the system, it is very difficult for a local body to function. I think it is both the legislature and parliament together that have actually reduced the role and functioning of local bodies. Basically, I think in a democracy or anywhere, everybody wants to amass power and authority. So this also, I think, has come. So there has to be some constitutional protection to this. So as you rightly said, 73rd and 74th constitutional amendments, they have been made in right earnest. But to what extent did the amendment actually make it mandatory for implementation? So there are so many acts that this country has made. But when it comes to implementation, has there been any way that the implementation also is safeguarded? That, I think, is the lacuna over there.
So one method that is being used to safeguard, to the extent that it's possible, the finances that are due to local governments has I think, an inherent contradiction, and I'm keen to hear your views on this, in that centralization or the union government is often a much more benevolent and willing player in supporting financing to local governments. So the Finance Commission, Central Finance Commission, since the 10th Finance Commission has consistently been giving grants to dedicated for local governments, even though constitutionally the formula has to be designed on the basis of what the State Finance Commission determines. It's willing to go beyond that when the State Finance Commission isn't created. But there's a contradiction. After all, it was state governments, the state legislatures that were supposed to pass their own Panchayati Raj acts, and through the State Finance Commission determine the nature of devolution. So, in a way, the role of the union government now has been to bypass the states on the argument that the states are not doing their job. But that has also created a second question, in a contradiction challenge, at least as I think about it, which is that it allows the union government then to say, now we'll impose conditionalities. So whether it is centrally sponsored schemes that are transferring some degree of funds to local governments, or it is, say, for example, the most recent 15th Finance Commission grants to municipalities and panchayats, but specifically to municipalities, filled with conditionalities. How do we reconcile these two? So these two, on the one hand, more money is, somebody is at least empowering or giving some resources to local governments, because minus this, there would be nothing. But on the other, it's opened the path to a very centralized kind of decentralization. So what are your thoughts on this? And in your capacity as State Finance Minister, where you're dealing with precisely these questions of carving, crafting, devolution, both administratively and to local governments, how do you think about these contradictions of conditionality and untied funding?
So the functioning of any institution automatically is centered around the fiscal aspect. So now here, the center says, this is the tax revenue or a non-tax revenue or whatever revenues that are coming. So this is what is with me, and the Finance Commission makes recommendations on what percentage to be devolved to the states, what to be given as a grant, after giving the grant, how much is a condition-based grant, how much is under-conditional, etc. So is the state. Now the state says, this is the state's own tax revenues, so this is what I can do with it. So in the process, where is the local body? So local body, now center gets income tax, corporate tax, GST, etc., etc. The state gets excise, petroleum, part of the GST, etc. Now where does the local body actually get the revenue? It has to be very little. It's only house tax. House tax is something which you cannot really, because it's all politically connected. Very difficult for somebody to just keep on tweaking or reviewing the house taxes. The other forms of revenues that a local body gets is minimal. The little bit of properties that the local body has, or previously we used to have some entertainment tax, one or two theaters here and there. So this doesn't actually amount to much. So it comes down to local body, neither is it able to raise any tax revenue on its own, nor is it being given money. So the best ideal way is some X amount of money has to be given unconditionally to the local body, depending on the criteria, population or something. Certain can be given as a grant in a way that you tie it up with water supply or sanitation or whatever is required, because not every local body might be able to see what best is required for the local body or the state. So the ideal way is, I think, they have to be given some sort of just like how devolution is done to the state. Now the state says center is devolving, so whatever devolution is coming to us, we are free to do what we want with it. Similarly, I think local bodies also have to have a part, because when it comes to the revenues, center or state, where is the revenue coming from? The revenue is coming from some activity that is happening in a city or a town or a village. So who is the taxpayer ultimately? Where does the taxpayer live? The taxpayer is living either in city, taxpayer lives in Mumbai, taxpayer lives in Calcutta, taxpayer lives in Chennai. So he is contributing. Another person, where is the industry located? Industry is located in Aurangabad, the industry is located in Nashik, industry is located in some other city, town. So when the tax or the revenue itself is arising from a local body, what is the local body getting back in return? It is the local body that has to actually take care of the entire, now for an industry to thrive, who takes care of the industry? Who takes care of all the utilities that are required for the industry? It is the local body. So now when the center is saying that this is my money, when the state is saying that it is my money, but where is that my money coming from? The my money is actually coming from a place which is unable to get any share of it. And whatever comes to the local body is looked upon as some alms that is given, not as a right of the local body. So local body should have either based some criteria, based on population or based on the generation of tax revenue or some criteria or maybe weightage to certain things, and given some portion of the devolution. When that is done, then the local body will be free to, then comes the center or state might say, no, you do not know how to handle it. See, Whatever you know to handle it, same thing we also know to handle it. So if you are able to handle it, we'll also be able to handle it.
Probably better.
Probably. But ultimately, if somebody is not able to handle it well, the public always have an opportunity to change. Every 5 years you have a change. Just like how there's a change in the legislature, change in the parliament, same thing will happen, change in the local body. But I firmly believe that there has to be a straight money coming in to the local body for local bodies to function independently as well as efficiently.
So one of the solutions that has been put on the table by none other than Vijay Kelkar is that in the debates on GST, we never spoke about what proportion of GST should go to local governments, and he has proposed that that could be one solution to this challenge of revenue. I just wanted to know your thoughts on that, and if you think solutions of this nature are viable, what will it take? Is this a debate that needs to be had in the GST Council, or what would it take to actually move our policies and our fiscal architecture in that direction?
I would say not just GST. It has to be straight from devolution. Because what are the other taxes that are coming to the center? It is coming in the form of customs, it is coming in the form of income tax, it is coming in the form of corporate tax. Now all these institutions, the point of origin is the local body, some local body. So why just GST? I believe that straight away, just like how states are getting a part of the devolution, center can, if necessary, reduce certain schemes. See, it is not necessary for the center to give 60 programs or 80 programs. Let the local bodies and let the state governments also decide on what is more specific to them. So you can reduce your CSS expenditure, you can reduce your CASDS expenditure. What is important you can have, your primary responsibility in the center is certain areas like defense and certain areas like central administration units. Not necessarily which state should have how many nurses working, which state should have how many teachers working. Let them decide. In a federal structure, let the states decide. Similarly, let the local bodies also decide on what they want to do. Ultimately, people are electing their representatives. So for a common man, a normal man, Aam Aadmi, who is not concerned with any political leanings, etc., for him or her, to be administered well, governed well, it is that there should be multiple areas. Concentration of authority, concentration of power in one place, always as important for a common man to have a good livable area for him to thrive. Just like how important defense is, this also is equally important.
So what stops us from doing this? How shall we move? I mean, in a way, we've been circling around the same conversation for the better part of the last 25 to 30 years. The argument of not empowering local governments finds itself caught in this question of capacity. So it's a chicken and an egg. Do you give the funds first or build the capacity first? And different states have tried different things, but by and large, it seems with only one or two exceptions, the general formula is there is no capacity, so it becomes an excuse to centralize. And simultaneously, we've now moved in the direction towards technology transfers, direct benefit transfers, that in some senses, while they may be more efficient perhaps, but one of the questions that's always been on my mind is whether or not that just takes away the role of the local governments entirely, because it can now be between a central architecture, wherever it is, down to the individual beneficiary. So, you know, in a sense, as we've gone down this argument of saying we recognize that local governments are important, but there is a capacity constraint. We've solved the capacity constraint by creating a digital architecture that completely bypasses the local government. And I think with the exception of you, frankly, we've stopped really talking about local governments. And it's not just a union government issue, state after state after state. These debates are very peripheral to the discourse on fiscal federalism, which is now so central in our debates about the Indian economy and public finance. So, you know, from your perspective, what will it take for us to, A, bring local governments back into the center? As we all agree, it's a crucial part of governance. And, you know, where do you see the solutions coming from?
It actually has to be the will of the parliament and the legislatures. when JRY, Jawahar Rozgar Yojana was, until the time that JRY was actually implemented, local bodies had barely nothing. Barely anything, sorry. And it is only after the JRY was implemented that villages started seeing some sort of basic amenities being done. So how did they implement JRY? JRY was given only on certain conditions. Until then, there were various state governments which never held elections, even for 10 years, 15. So amongst the many conditions that were imposed, conduct of elections in a particular time, etc., was necessary to have your grant coming. So how did this happen? This happened with the will of the parliament. So similarly, in order to empower local bodies, in order to give them their due, in order to make them be able to function, it is the parliament and the local state assemblies, you have to have the will to come forward and not only enact, also make sure that it is implemented. I think it finally comes down to the will.
It finally comes down to the will. On that note, let me open it up to the audience for questions, comments. Harish, Rakesh, we'll maybe take 3, come back to you, and then do another round or 2.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister, for your exposition. And as Yamini said, it's music to my ears because I'm Rakesh Mohan.
I think if you don't mind, you can probably be seated in
spot. That the very first paper I wrote back in 1974 was on urban property taxes. So my question is that given everything that you have said, that is the urban or the, I'm not talking urban bodies, I don't know enough about the Panchayati Raj, etc. That, as you said, is the most important part of the system. That's where all the income gets generated, wealth gets generated, etc. And the issues of resources and capacity. So 2 questions. One, that as far as resources is concerned, I was a bit surprised that you're sort of just waving away the property tax issue. Because if you look at the 15th Finance Commission report and many other documents, that India has about the lowest share of proportion of GDP in terms of local taxes. And in property tax, it used to be a big problem, but it seems to me that with IT now, there's no issue in having a full register of properties. Second, that with urbanization taking place, people's incomes going up, huge amount of formal housing coming up. I mean, you just have to drive from around any city for 50 miles in the new flats and so on. So it seems to me that I'm a little surprised that as any state finance minister, that not enough attention is given to property tax. Of course, you can't suddenly raise, taking nothing, you make it so much. You can start at some point. There's no problem now having registered property. There's no problem now in terms of having indexed property taxes, etc. And it seems to me that this is something 15th Finance Commission emphasized. And of course, that's connected with the issue of state finance commissions, that if you have state finance commissions, they make that conditionality for this thing, and then and of course, have more development. But you then have to do the taxes. Second, on capacity, again, given the kind of improvement that has taken place in our country in terms of educational levels of the population, there's a huge number of people now who would love to work in, say, the local body, as long as it's competent, as long as there's good working conditions, etc., etc. Seems to me the capacity issue is not so great now if you just want to do it.
Yeah. Harish, we'll take your question, and if there's a question from here, and then we'll come back to you, sir. We'll do a couple of rounds.
Sir, revenue is getting more and more centralized. I mean, especially with GST, and more and more the collection will happen at the center. I mean, I don't know how much, even if we assume avenues like property tax and all. But it is a fact that more and more revenues will accrue to the center. On the other hand, as you're saying, the responsibility, the expenditure responsibilities of local bodies are actually increasing more and more. So this gap will keep increasing in the coming days. Linked to this is another thing, the fact that more and more the maximum revenues are being generated maybe in south, places which have economic activity, okay? And again, that revenues is going to the center, and then it is getting reallocated in whatever so-called Bimaru states, etc. Do you think that is going to be the next, maybe, I don't know, an elephant in the room conflict down the line, that we are generating more and more revenues, but somebody else is taking, that kind of a thing. You think this is going to happen?
Thank you. Is there a question on this side? Yeah, gentleman there. I'll come back to both of you in the next round.
Good morning, sir. Sir, as you are finance minister, you are also an ex officio member of GST council meeting. Sir, if GST is imposed on petrol and diesel is come under the slab of GST, so what steps will be taken by the government of Andhra Pradesh to recover the revenue which we got from non-GST petrol and diesel?
I didn't get you. Can you repeat the question?
Sir, if petrol and diesel come under the slab of GST, so what will be the losses? Because it will not, you get a revenue that you got today. What you got today, you will not got after the petrol and diesel come under the GST slab. So what will be the steps taken by the government to recover such revenue if it is imposed?
Yes, please.
The first question is property tax. No, property tax is a must. It is a must. It is necessary. It is the primary source of revenue presently for any local body. And this is not the case with India, everywhere. The reduction in property tax, or what you just said, that when compared to many countries, yes, we are. Property tax wise, we are low. Payment for utilities also, India is one of the least. But then this did not happen suddenly. Over a period of time, decades together, this happened. Now in AP, we have a particular way where every year 5% automatically is increased. But even then, so it is a must that property tax has to be regularly increased or reviewed according to the times and the situation. But at the same time, how much ever you do it, still you again require much more money to come in. So property tax is an important part, but at the same time, it cannot take care of the entire expenditure of the local body. Now, second, increase or review of property tax becomes not just a decision of the local body, it is a government decision. So when it is a government decision, again it comes to the will. So unless the government has a will, it is not possible to. Now for example, what we have, 5%. Maybe many states won't be doing that. But we have a periodical yearly increase in 5%. So similar, it may be 5, it may be 10 or whatever. But then that increase has to be there. Pardon me? That's what we said. See, this did not happen overnight. See, decades together when something happens, overnight you suddenly cannot change it. No, let us say the income tax going rate is 30%. You suddenly cannot make it 60. It has to happen over. So petroleum beginning when they used to increase the price of petrol, every time, once they started increasing it every week, every 15 days, slowly, then people got used to it. So it has to happen gradually.
So how much are you raising through property tax?
Pardon me? I don't know the exact figures. I cannot tell you the exact figures, but that, and your question was if I can...
No, I said that tax collections are becoming more and more centralized.
Centralized, correct.
Now it's a matter of time before even petrol and diesel will come under GST.
So your question was centralized, yeah. So how much comes back to the states that are, now you have some weightage given to certain aspects. Now for example, your revenue, your business, industry, tax, revenue could be one, population could be one, because ultimately in a country like India where we have different areas, different regions, it also becomes incumbent on us to take care of areas that do not have naturally are disadvantaged. Now, Northeast is naturally disadvantaged. So we have to take care, being a country. So you have, so you can have a weightage in the future in order to address this issue. Now they say that certain states, industrially that are advanced, like Gujarat, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, so they actually get more taxes. So are they going to get back their due? But again, see, you look at it, so production alone does not become a right. So if an industry is producing something, it is also being consumed. So you can give certain weightage to what taxes are being generated over there. You can also give weightage That is exactly the way in which the Finance Commission devolutions also have taken place, more or less. So I think you have to somewhere do a little bit of plus minus on that. And the last question is, until now, it's still, the petroleum products has still not been handled by GST. So we have to see, we have to wait and watch what the states are going to say, because that is the last of the independent sizable income that the state has. It's only petroleum products and excise. These are the only two areas. So we have to wait and see whether states are going to accept giving that up or not.
So I think we have time for two more questions. Mr. Raghunandan there, and I'll ask you, you had your hand up earlier, and then I have one question from Partho on which he sent to me on WhatsApp, which I'll come to after. So Raghunandan, first to you. And then
Honorable Minister, what you said was very pragmatic and it can be implemented. As far as property tax is concerned, also to clarify to Mr. Rakesh Mohan, actually your state is doing pretty well, but this is mostly a South Indian phenomenon. It's Karnataka, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Goa, Maharashtra, which are collecting property taxes at the panchayat level. There are two suggestions that I would like to make on property tax. The first is that the 13th Finance Commission recommended, in order to kind of insulate the local leader from the political consequences of raising property taxes, that this decision could be centralized to a property tax board. And I believe every state, including your state, did pass an order constituting such a board, but I'm not sure whether that board is actually functioning. So maybe it's useful to actually insulate the local political leader from the adverse political consequences of raising taxes. Also, you might get some kind of standardization which avoids court cases. The second point is that the Government of India in the previous budget has allocated some money for proper house mapping in rural areas. I think it's about 200 crores or something was announced, which will actually improve your tax base. Because from Karnataka, where I'm from, they have used this to increase the number of houses or properties enumerated to tax by 40%. So then what happens is that you have a better tax base that includes things like windmills, solar farms, petrol bunks, things like that, which are commercial properties which are outside the property tax net. And you can actually levy tax on them without raising the tax rates. So I completely agree with you in your point that that will still not pay for all the services that are to be delivered for a local government. And there always will be necessity for an intergovernmental fiscal transfer of untied grants coming to them. But still, I think there's a lot of leeway in raising property taxes. There's a lot of elbow room here. But you'll have to negotiate through that politically so that adverse consequences are not visited upon you politically.
Thank you. The question there.
Hello, sir. So my question is, it is so far believed that Jal Jeevan Mission is one of the best public schemes that have been implemented in India. I was just looking into that. Andhra Pradesh has also done great. There are like almost 15 lakh connections, tap connections within 1.5 years. And I have just checked like Goa, Telangana, these states have also achieved 100% connections. I guess the policy is based that they will be made and 3 models will be suggested to them, and as per their needs local people will participate, and that's how they choose a model, they maintain it, and everything is done that way, and therefore it has been so successful. It has been debated in the academic circles as well. So coming as a finance minister, so what is your experience and what do you think if such a model in the physical federal system is implemented for schools, for colleges, for hospitals, everything where people's participation can be done by making these committees where more and more people get the voices, where models are prescribed to them by the experts, but they get to choose which model works best for them. Do you think this is a way which India can take and which can leapfrog our federalism from the bottom and the best can be implemented? Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I'll just very quickly add Partho's question into the mix. So it takes you in a slightly different direction, but I think you'll have a lot to say on this, which is about the role of local governments in skills, in understanding skill needs, or do you think that these are two very different worlds of demand and supply. How do we how do we build the capacity of local governments to be able to better identify local skill needs emerging from the expansion of digital governance and digital infrastructure through different, as well as physical infrastructure through schemes like PMGSY and PMGKY?
Okay, shall I start with
Yes.
Mr. Raghunandan's? So here basically there are two categories. One is the municipalities and one is the panchayats. So normally what happens, the mapping has been done in municipalities and there is some structure in place. It only depends on whether at what rate you are or how much you are taxing, property tax. When it comes to the rural local bodies, the major gram panchayats and the minor gram panchayats, most of the minor gram panchayats, the mapping hasn't been done. And most of the minor gram panchayats, there is no door number. Most of the minor gram panchayats, there is zero tax collection. That's because they are completely rural and that's how it has come over a period of time. Maybe not in Kerala, but most of the states. Minor gram. So, minor gram panchayats is where you have to get them accustomed to start paying property tax, which is a completely political decision. So, because decades together they haven't been paying. It's like decades together, just imagine you're not paying any water tax. Suddenly you're asked to pay tax. Decades together, imagine you were getting free power. Suddenly you're asked to pay for power. So this is a very political challenge which has to be dealt with by the governments. So in the areas where house tax, property tax is already being collected, then there we can have a centralized system where the local body can be insulated from the increase. Where you can just say that it's not my decision. But getting the non-tax, it's like income tax. See, once you're an assessee, then automatically you get into the system. If you're not an assessee at all, so how do you get him to become an assessee? That is the challenge. Yeah, second was the Jal Jeevan Mission, right? So Jal Jeevan Mission actually has been designed and only has started to be implemented only from last year onwards. In the design itself, there was a flaw. So the flaw in the design was it is basically taking the water to the doorstep, but it is more important actually to create the water. See, any local body, once you have the water, the challenge is water. Once the water is there, giving the tap is not a big deal at all. The distribution network and all, even taking a tap donation fee also from the user will be sufficient to have the distribution in place. So there was a problem initially with the design of the thing. Secondly, now with regard to who runs, I don't know, I'm just hearing it from you that the public run it. No, I think it is the local body that runs it. That is the local body. They are elected, not constitutionally elected. So it is basically that Samiti, or whether it is the Samiti or the Taluk Parshad or these are all different terms that are used in different states, but they are the elected local body. So it is their responsibility to supply, to provide services. This is one of the important services, drinking water. And with regard to skills, Yamini, the skilling, I think, is a subject which has to be taken up at a higher level. But participation of local bodies definitely helps. Because a local body might not be equipped to understand the subject called skilling. Because skilling is very dynamic. It changes with the day. And you have to study the demand, you have to study the supply. And this also requires a lot of capital and also revenue expenditure by the government. So local bodies might be an important input, but to handle skilling subject by themselves might be too big for them or might not be viable.
In fact, I think your response to that sort of raises, at the heart of this conversation is what I think is the fundamental governance and fiscal federal challenge for India, which is making that determination of what level of government should be performing what level of function. And I think everything that you have said to us in the last hour has sort of reminded us that in some ways that still remains the foundational challenge that we need to resolve. So first determine who should be doing what on on a basic set of first principles, the principle of subsidiarity, and then figuring out what is the best way to empower them in ways that they can do their job best. And I think the message I'm taking from this conversation is how important it is for us to go back to believing in the possibility of local governments and the recognition that elected representatives in a democratic context are really at the heart of what governance is about, and democracy itself creates elements of accountability. So as much as we keep wondering about questions of capacity, ultimately the people have elected their representatives, and the people will be the masters of the choices that we have to make. Thank you so much, Minister. It's been such an absolute
And
privilege.
there's one other addition also that the local body can give, Yamini. One is the governance aspect, etc. But the overall administration of the governance capacities, just like how an IAS officer is trained, starts with being a village accountant. IPS officer is trained as a sub-inspector in a police station. Similarly, a person who starts his career from a local body, the understanding that the person has of the overall governance is of a different nature, because implementation starts over there. So that is one other addition. You have a strong local body churning out good representatives from the local bodies who in case can graduate up to the top. They definitely have a better perspective, I feel. I strongly feel they have a better perspective and a better understanding of not just sanction, implementation of
which you are the best example. It's very rare to have a finance minister talk at such depth about local governments. Usually they are worried about revenue deficits and fiscal deficits. So thank you very, very much. It's been an absolute privilege, and I hope that CPR can continue our engagement with you to think about these questions and push the agenda more going forward.
Yeah. Thank you, Yamini and CPR, for this wonderful opportunity to be able to interact with everybody. Thank you.
We are the new generation.